This week on the election campaign with Andrew Neil and guests at midnight, after BBC One joins David Dimbleby in the Midlands for Question Time.
Tonight we're in West Bromwich, where with 2 weeks to go until the election, we've a deck full of leaders, deputy leaders and former leaders. This is Question Time. And welcome to you listening or watching, to our audience here and, of course, to our panel. The panel tonight, former leader of the Conservative Party and former Foreign Secretary William Hague, Labour's Deputy Leader Harriet Harman, the Deputy First Minister of Scotland and former leader of the SNP John Swinney, the Deputy Leader of UKIP Paul Nuttall and the Green Party Leader Natalie Bennett. As always, text or tweet us, our hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text comments to 83981, and as you know, push the red button. You'll see what others are saying. Right, our first question from Sharon Johnson, please.
Should the surviving migrants who crossed the Mediterranean Sea be sent back to their countries of origin?
Paul Nuttall.
Well, I think, firstly, we must say that we must put a stop to this loss of life. I think we're doing the right thing, sending the Navy down to the Mediterranean. I think we must stop these people drowning, and we must ensure that we bring these traffickers of human misery to book, and they must be prosecuted. I also think that we must put more money into it. I think we should use the foreign aid budget to do so. That's what the foreign aid budget is there, for humanitarian crises, and this is a humanitarian crisis, but equally we must accept that this is a global problem and we need to get the African Union more involved. The Arab League need to take more responsibility, and indeed this must come under the auspices of the United Nations.
What do you actually want to do with what do you want to do with the people who are coming over in rickety boats and landing in Italy?
Well, I will make that point in a second, because we must ensure that the Mediterranean becomes the most heavily policed piece of water on the planet to ensure that this misery stops.
Yeah, but how do you stop it?
Well, what's coming out of the summit in Brussels tonight is quite interesting, actually, because I'm hearing that there will be a proposal on the table to create an enclave in Tunisia, which will be UN-backed, where the migrants can go and you can sort out then who are the true asylum seekers and those who are the economic migrants. And what we must say is, look, the Australians seem to have got this right, OK? 18 months ago, Australia had a similar problem to this. Not, of course, on the same scale, but a similar problem. And the Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, was elected on a no-boats policy. And in effect, what he did is he created a ring of steel around Australia. And in the last 18 months, there have been no boats, no drownings, no deaths. What we must ensure is that these people are looked after safely. And the way to do that is to ensure that they don't get on the boat in the first place.
All right. William Hague.
Well, it's always been the policy of this country that we want people to be able to stay and prosper in a stable country. And a lot of our work goes into, for instance, stabilising Somalia. Many of these people are coming from Somalia or Eritrea. On the specific question of whether they can be returned, of course, it does depend on the individual and on the country as to whether they can be returned. Some of them will have a legitimate case for asylum. Many will not. And so I don't think you can say a single blanket solution about every individual case. But clearly, this is a problem we've not succeeded in solving yet. There was a previous policy which was to rescue people closer to the shores of Africa. That didn't work. More people died at that time than before that policy was instituted. Clearly, what we've done since then hasn't worked either. So what the European leaders, including the Prime Minister, are working on tonight is a new set of policies that helps to smash the trafficking gangs, that, yes, greatly increases Britain's contribution militarily and financially to rescuing people. But it cannot be a presumption that if you are rescued, you're able to claim asylum in the United Kingdom.
So
Otherwise, of course, we create an even bigger problem.
Now, wait a moment. If you're rescued and taken to Italy, presumably you can claim asylum, because you're in the EU.
Well, that will depend, as I say, on the circumstance of the individual and the country that they come from.
So you
but I wouldn't expect that would be the...
I don't think people applying for asylum, even if they'd landed in Europe.
Well, no, I'm not saying you stop people applying for asylum. I'm saying there will always be people who are... Yes, it depends on the circumstances.
Is it not
but we're not saying no one can claim.
Was it not the case if they step foot on a British ship that they can claim asylum?
Well, the offer we are making at the meeting that is taking place in Brussels today is that it's clear that if they are rescued by a British ship, they are taken to the nearest safe country. In most cases, that would be...
You're not answering his question. Can they apply for asylum if they're aboard a British ship?
No, well, no, it is on condition that they would not be able to do so.
So you scoop them up out of the sea and then take them somewhere else?
To the nearest safe country, which is the right thing to do.
I'd just like to come back to the idea of forming enclaves. The Mediterranean, the Middle East, has got a great number of refugee enclaves and camps. They are short-term viewed, and then in the long term, they sit there for decades, and they end up getting poorer and poorer and breeding terrorism. So I really disagree fundamentally with that.
Harriet Harman, would you like to pick up on that point?
Well, think how desperate these people have to be to get into a boat, to travel it so dangerously, and this is women with newborn babies as well as families with young children as well as men. And we've just got to remember that there is absolute desperation that leads them to do this. And the idea that we should cancel the rescue mission and scale it right down, which is what happened before, in order to teach them a lesson by seeing loads of them dying, I just think is complete, total, heartbreaking inhumanity, and I'm totally against that.
And the question wasn't whether they should be picked out of the sea, but whether they should be sent back to Nigeria or Somalia or wherever they've come from.
But what we need to be doing is making absolutely sure that we're doing everything that we can to make the circumstances in the countries that they have fled from less dangerous. I think we should be supporting the UN envoy's work in Libya. We should be doing more to help in the situation in Syria. And the rule is, as I understand it...
How long is that going to take? I mean, it's going to take years.
You know, it is an intractable problem. We have to work together with our partners in Europe and with the Arab League and the African Union. But you do not solve the problem by thinking the problem is first and foremost the annoyance for us of people drowning in the Mediterranean. That is absolutely wrong and would be a shame on us if people look back in hundreds of years' time and think that our concern in this country was the annoyance of people coming and drowning on our shores. They'll say, what sort of country have we become? And I think that we should be making sure, and by the way, the rule is, I'm sure, you know, William Hague will know more about this than me because he's been Foreign Secretary, but as I understand it, the rule is that the place where you land, that you don't have a right to claim asylum somewhere else because, and so this is the case for the people who arrive on that Italian island, because if you allow people to then transfer after they've arrived, then that is what really helps the market in people trafficking.
But that's very convenient because you say we in Britain don't have to accept these people because they've landed in Italy.
No, but we should help the Italians on a European-wide basis.
But if they seek asylum in Italy,
European effort to
if they're given asylum in Italy, they can go anywhere within Europe, can't they?
No, they can't.
But they have to stay in Italy?
Yeah, they do,
right?
and they do.
You're given asylum, isn't it? I thought the EU allowed people to move around.
No, you claim asylum in the country that you've arrived in. You can't then move to other countries.
John Swinney.
The first thing I think we have to do is think about this on a human level, that we've got people who are in enormous danger and difficulty, and therefore the first thing I think we have to do is to learn the lessons of the last couple of years and restore the search and rescue services that were taken away from the Mediterranean. And that has to be done not just by the neighbouring countries, that has to be a European-wide effort, and I think we have to acknowledge our part and our participation in that effort, because until we do that, then I think we will see more of the tragic circumstances that we've seen because those arrangements are not in place.
And where should the people that are picked up from the sea, assuming the rescue operation is more effective, where should they be taken?
Well, that's,
what's your view?
They should then be
that
taken.
Was the question.
Well, they should then be taken to the nearest places of safety, and that again also I think has to be a set of arrangements put in place by a European-wide, an acknowledged European-wide effort to recognise the fact that although this is happening adjacent to Italy, Malta, Greece, it is a European-wide issue, and because we happen to be quite far away from it, doesn't absolve us of a responsibility to help in the solution. And the final thing I'd like to just say, David, is that we also have to see this as part of a general effort to create political stability in different countries. We were involved in the military intervention in Libya, and we have to acknowledge that if we have done that, we also have an obligation to try to create political stability and support political stability in Libya, because that is the source of where many of these difficulties are coming from.
The man up there, yes, sir. And I'll come to you. The man up there in the third row from the back, yes.
The problem I got with that is these people smugglers are not stupid. If they know you're going to keep taking them, they're going to find ways to get them to where they want to be. If I remember right, they used to get the boats to go all the way to Italy, and then they started taking the petrol out of the boats so that they finished up halfway, so they'd be rescued by the Italians and then claim asylum. And it wouldn't surprise me now that I wouldn't like to say, but I think they might be crashing these boats on purpose just to make sure that at least half of them get...
That's certainly been an allegation that's been made.
That's murder.
And the woman here at the front, and then I'll come to you, Natalie. Yes.
I think if one or two children in this country died from drowning, there'd be an outcry. Hundreds of innocent children are dying. We don't need prevarication, we need action. We need to reinstate the Union.
Natalie, just before I come to you, I just want to go to Sharon Johnson, who asked the question. What do you think?
Well, like Harriet was saying before, the people are desperate, regardless if they're economic migrants or they're refugees. They're desperate. You must be desperate, otherwise you wouldn't be getting on those boats in the first place.
OK. Natalie.
Well, I'd like to agree with those last two audience members. And it is worth thinking about how we got to this point, how we've seen these hundreds of deaths. And the International Organisation for Migration says if we continue at the current rate, we'll see 30,000 dead by the end of the year. And that's because we said we're going to pull the search and rescue mission back, and that will stop the people coming. That is clearly false. And we're seeing a real risk in the kind of rhetoric we're hearing out of the EU summit, the same kind of mistake, the same sort of deadly mistake. Again, we're hearing about we're going to stop the people smugglers, we're going to bomb the boats. Now, quite a few people in this room, I think, will be old enough to remember, as I do, when there were lots of Cuban refugees fleeing Cuba. They used to flee on rafts. They put together a few oil drums, some bits of wood, and they tried to flee Cuba. These are desperate people. You look at the situation of 86% of the Assyrians and the Eritreans who applied for asylum in Britain last year were given asylum. They are refugees. They're fleeing the most desperate circumstances. What we have to do is reinstate the rescue mission immediately and focus on rescue. We also have to think about a way of ensuring that people who are refugees can find a safe route here. And I think it's an absolute disgrace, the fact that the UN has asked Britain to take its fair share of the most vulnerable Syrian refugees. David Cameron said he wasn't going to do that. What he'd do instead was he'd set up our own program. Now, under that UN scheme, last year, Germany took 20,000 refugees. We have taken 143.
All right, fine. Well, let me just put that to William Hague, and then we'll go on. Just that last point.
Well, including that point, too, but the lady in the front row said action is needed. And just to assure you, at today's meeting, Britain has offered HMS Bulwark, the flagship of the Royal Navy, with 3 helicopters, with 2 border patrol craft. We've offered to double the British funding for the European Border Organisation and to send experts. So action is being taken. But other members of the panel have been right about the need to create stability in other countries. And on Natalie's point about Syria, Britain is the second most generous country in the world in the assistance we give to Syrian refugees. We should not talk down what our country does. £800 million of assistance that is providing food and water for tens of thousands of Syrians and education for their children. So Britain plays an enormous role, as we should. Right. But we also have to do the work to stabilise.
OK, fine. Would you accept that what we did in Libya has caused much of this? I mean, I sat on this programme in February 2012, and I said, what will come after Gaddafi will probably be worse. There'd be a humanitarian crisis. There'd be lots of deaths. And at the same time, you were saying that Libya was a great success. Well, it's so successful that the official government of Libya have to meet on a boat off the coast of
Yeah,
Gibraltar.
but that isn't... You're not saying...
No, it is.
Hang on,
because when Gaddafi went, the traffickers moved in.
But hang on, you're not saying there's nowhere people could get to Europe from if Libya was in a different state now, that no country along the littoral would allow people to get to Italy?
Libya is the main gateway at the moment, and it is a gateway that...
And I want to pick up the point.
But let me answer Paul's point, because it's an important point, and people sometimes think that we intervened in Libya because it was already unstable, not because it was a model of stability. Remember, there was a war going on in Libya, and Colonel Gaddafi was on the brink of murdering many thousands
of people. And I really want to come back on
to save life in this situation. It's important to save life.
You can't come back because we've had quarter of an hour and we have a number of questions we've got to go through. And there's an election coming and there are a lot of questions about that. We've had quarter of an hour on that and I want to move on. Just before I do, though, I should say that we are going to be in Leeds next week for a rather different kind of question time. We've got David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg, each facing the question time audience one by one. And that's a live programme here on BBC One. And there isn't a question time, of course, on election night. We've got the results programme. But the night after, that's Friday, February the 8th, there's a live question time from London. So there are two live programmes. And that one will be a first chance to hear your reaction to the way that the country has voted. So if you want to join us in Leeds or London, and I'll give this again at the end of the programme, there's the address to go to and the telephone number to call. Now, I want to move on to another question from Abby Price, please. Abby Price.
Would it be a catastrophe for the United Kingdom if the SNP held the balance of power after the election?
William Hague.
Yes, it absolutely would be a catastrophe in the United Kingdom.
I don't agree with you on that point.
Without any personal offence to John here sitting on my left. And it would be because you have to remember what the purpose of the Scottish National Party is. And I hope I'm not misdescribing their purpose. It is to break up the United Kingdom. It is for Scotland to be an independent nation, which means the breakup of the United Kingdom. And it's difficult to imagine a more dangerous situation in Parliament than for the balance of power to be held by a party that wants to use its leverage and influence in order to break up the country.
But they lost the referendum. What can they do in Westminster which will allow them to achieve what they didn't achieve with the referendum?
Well, they can do two things. First of all, they would push a Labour government, since they've said there are no circumstances in which they would work with a Conservative government, but they would push a Labour government to more and more extreme positions on spending and taxation. But I believe it would also be in the interest of the Scottish National Party to make impossible demands that nobody could agree to, so that Scotland was turned against England and England against Scotland. And because, after all, it is the Scottish elections next year. And what they really want to win is the Scottish elections next year, so that then they can make the case for another referendum. He's almost nodding at this, but he'll get his own turn in a moment. And that means they will make impossible demands to turn Scotland against England and vice versa.
So you think that if there's a Labour government... I mean, the question was, would it be a catastrophe? You're saying that if there's a Labour government which depends in part on the support of the SNP, the Union will split apart. That's your view?
Well, I'm saying the Union would be gravely damaged.
Well, that's not a catastrophe. A catastrophe is if it breaks up.
I think the Union being gravely damaged is a catastrophe, actually.
I think
David, and it could
irrecoverable.
Lead to its breakup.
If Labour is elected, it's irrecoverable.
We don't know whether, but I certainly think it ranks as a catastrophe, in the words of the lady's question. And the answer to that, of course, there's only one answer to that.
Yeah, we know what that is.
You guessed it, which is to have a Conservative majority in the general election.
Well, surprise, surprise. John Swinney.
Well, to answer the question directly, the answer that I would say is no, it would not be. No, it was surprised to hear me say that. During the referendum campaign, we were told by people like William and various other people who support the Unionist position that Scotland shouldn't leave the United Kingdom, we should lead the United Kingdom. That was the slogan that people were told in Scotland. Don't leave the UK, lead the United Kingdom. So here we are, in a situation where the people of Scotland may decide in the election on the 7th of May to send a significant group of SNP MPs to Westminster if the opinion polls are followed. And we've made it absolutely crystal clear our top priority in this election, and the top priority of SNP MPs, will be to end austerity. That's what we'll be coming to end in the United Kingdom election, to end the austerity that William and his Liberal Democrat partners have inflicted on the people, not just of Scotland, the people of the United Kingdom into the bargain, and to start investing once again in our public services and our public infrastructure.
So that would be your price for supporting a Labour wedge in the House of Commons.
It would be about ending austerity and increasing public expenditure. And we've set out that that would be by 0.5% above inflation. And that has been assessed and looked at, and it's a perfectly deliverable proposition. It involves, yes, more borrowing. It means repairing the deficit later than sooner. But what it would do would relieve many thousands of our citizens from the misery of austerity that many of them are living through just now.
Harriet
so
Harman,
that would be our top priority.
Would that be a price that you would be prepared to accept, what he's just described, for support from the SNP?
Well, all this talk about ending austerity, the best way to protect people against the extreme spending cuts and the unfairness and the threats to the NHS is not by having David Cameron in number 10 again. And if you're urging people, if you're, you know, that is the way to protect everybody in this country against the extreme austerity. But if you're urging people in Scotland, don't vote Labour, vote SNP, and then in Wales you say, don't vote Labour, vote Plaid, then in England you say, don't vote Labour, vote Green, what do you think the result would be? Then that would be David Cameron. You are David Cameron's best hope of getting back into number 10. And the point is, your priority, I don't believe, is austerity. Your priority is independence. That's what you want. And we are not speaking from the unionist position. We're British. We're from the UK. We're not a position. We're actually this country. And I think there is a threat. One is breaking up Britain, and the other is the danger of you putting David Cameron back in number 10.
But the point, Harriet, but the point is this. Throughout the referendum campaign, people in Scotland were told, you have an ability to influence the United Kingdom. And what the people in Scotland are democratically considering in the run-up to this election is who they want to send to Westminster to democratically influence the United Kingdom. And we've made it crystal clear that we will go into the House of Commons determined to take an approach to investment in the economy which the Labour Party does not take. The Labour Party wants to cut public spending. We want to start investing in public expenditure to end the austerity that, regrettably, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are prepared to prolong after this election on the 7th of May.
Single-handedly, the SNP would use its influence, you're saying, to force on the Labour Party a policy they don't want. You can't dodge the question.
I'm not dodging the question.
We can relax because we're not going to be forced. I mean, we've got our own manifesto, we've said what we're going to do, and we're not going to, you know, actually nobody's voted yet, but you're quite arrogant and you think you're telling us what to do, and nobody's actually even voted yet.
I'm saying the people of Scotland are considering how they will vote, and the opinion polls show that there is strong prospects.
Yeah, we get all that, and then if you get a large number of MPs...
Let's just look at the language here, David, that you've used about force. I was in a minority government in the Scottish Parliament for 4 years. We had to work with other parties. We had to agree with other parties. On some occasions, the Labour Party voted for the budget proposals that I put forward on behalf of the people. So when you come to agreements, it's not about forcing people. It's about people recognising...
The way you put it, it is, because you say this is what we're going to do, this is what we want to have as our policy, and by implication, that's the only way we'll support a Labour government.
What we are saying is that there's an appetite in the country to end austerity. It's an appetite to end it in Scotland, and the best way to do that is by voting SNP and influencing the outcome of the general election.
Natalie Bennett, let's hear from you. Thank you very much, John.
Well, I think what we're hearing here from both William and Harriet, and I'm afraid you too also, David, is a lack of respect for the voters. Each voter has a choice. You're not electing a Prime Minister, you're not electing a party, you're electing your local MP. And that's the sum total of all of those MPs, all of your choices as voters, will then have to decide what's happening in the new Parliament. Now, we know that first past the post is an utterly failed system that doesn't reflect the reality of British politics today, and the fact that we have a Westminster that hasn't been significantly reformed since women got the vote in 1918. And surely we can get to the centenary and have changed it by then. So we need to tackle all of that. But I would ask for some real respect for voters. And what I'm asking voters is to say, look at your local race to be your MP. look at the candidates, look at the parties, look at policies, and vote for what you believe in. And then the Parliament will collectively reflect the view of the British people.
But, Natalie, the question was, would it be, and you could answer this one directly perhaps, would it be a catastrophe for the United Kingdom if the SNP, and the words were, held the balance of power after the election, in your opinion?
Absolutely not, because that would reflect the view of the British people, the will as expressed at the ballot box. And, of course, what we're aiming to do is have a strong group of Green MPs in the Parliament who will also have a big say in this.
Paul, I'll come to you. Let's just hear from one or two members of the audience. The man with spectacles there in the second row from the back. You, sir. Yes.
To talk about getting rid of austerity is very, very seductive in these days and age. We've all had enough. We all want to get rid of it. But equally, we've had 5 years of pain, and I wouldn't want all that to be undone by another coalition-type government.
OK. And you in the second row.
Yes, it's very admirable, Natalie, and I completely agree with much of what you say. But in all this bluster of political parties saying what you won't do and who you won't work with, what we're actually losing as voters is knowing what you will do and what you will do for this country. The IFS say today that the four main political parties are not telling us enough of what you are going to do. The voter is left in the dark, and unfortunately I feel that some political parties are playing a game in the constituencies in that in a seat that they feel their party has no hope of winning, they're putting a candidate in who doesn't even live in the area and doesn't do work for the area. And I really feel that it's time to stop saying what you won't do and please respect the voter and inform us of what you will do.
OK, we may come to a bit of that in a moment. The man up there, you, sir. In the third row from the back, on the gangway, yes.
Didn't the IFS report today say that the SNP's plans would lead to a slower, longer austerity after all anyway?
It did, indeed. Paul Nuttall, what do you make of the question?
Well, the original question was, would it be a catastrophe? I think it would be, in essence, very dangerous, and I think it would be an affront to democracy in this country. I mean, if you look at the SNP's manifesto, it literally reads like £140 billion worth of demands. I mean, you could literally call it the longest ransom note in history. And the democratic deficit is this. You will end up with the 1.5 million people in Scotland who voted yes in the referendum dictating the economic policy of the whole of the UK, which incorporates about 40 million voters. We think that is unfair. We think it's wrong. I personally love the union. It's a union which has given us peace and prosperity for 300 years. It's benefited the English, it's benefited the Welsh, and indeed it has benefited the Scottish as well. But the problem that we face in this century is that the union is significantly unbalanced. And it's unbalanced in a way that punishes the English, not the Scottish. You know, I want to see a rebalancing, and the way we must do that is two ways. Firstly, we must do it democratically. We must have English votes for English-only laws in the House of Commons. And secondly, we must rip up the discredited Barnett formula, which ensures that Scotland receives around £1,400 per head more than the English. There's a problem in the union at the moment. We love it, we want to keep it together, but as I say, it needs to change to suit the 21st century, and I'm guessing that the only way we can really do that is going for a fully federal UK.
All right. William Hague, you're going to produce a manifesto for England tomorrow.
We are tomorrow.
Is this the first time the Tory party has ever had an English manifesto?
It is. I think it's the first time any of the major parties has. But we have a Scottish manifesto, we have a Welsh manifesto. There's no reason we shouldn't have an English manifesto.
But you're appealing to English nationalism, which the Conservative Party has been a unionist party.
Well, no, we're appealing to two things. This manifesto will set out, for instance, our plans for the West Midlands, where we are today, the jobs we want to create, the infrastructure we want to invest in all the different regions of England. I think that's one of the things the voters want to know about, that the lady in the second row there was talking about, the positive proposals of the party. But it will also set out how we're going to do English votes on English laws. And it's only the Conservative Party that will be able to deliver English votes.
But will it be real English votes for English laws or some sort of shady backdoor deal, which is what you were proposing?
Well, it will be the proposals we publish tomorrow. So there isn't going to be anything shady or backdoor about proposals that are actually
deal between these two.
That's actually published, and it will say that when Scotland has the power to set its own income tax or air passenger duty, that it would be unacceptable.
Is it going to get its power to set its own
Well, they
income
are.
tax?
Whatever happens, they are going to get that power in the Scottish Parliament. John Swinney is going to have that power to propose those things and vary the rate of income tax or air passenger duty in Scotland. But we can't then have a situation where the Scottish MPs come to Westminster and then vote for higher air passenger duty in England.
Does that make sense, John
We do
Swinney,
have
to you?
to do something about that, and that means, under our proposal...
Just check this one out.
Well, OK, ask him that.
Let's take that. There will be remaining issues that will be determined at the House of Commons after we get the additional powers that are talked about in the Smith Commission that will still have an effect in Scotland, where Scottish MPs have to vote on those issues.
Income tax?
Income tax is one issue. It remains a shared tax. It's not an entirely devolved tax. There are aspects
I thought you said it was going to be a devolved tax. You could set
The rates of income tax are going to be devolved.
The rates of income tax are devolved, but there are other elements about income tax that remain reserved to the United in relation to everything that is out with non-savings and non-savings, non-dividend income criteria of income tax are all reserved to the United Kingdom Parliament. All of the issues about thresholds, the personal allowance, is not devolved to the Scottish Parliament. That is reserved to the United Kingdom Parliament. These are all key issues around the formulation of income tax which are relevant for Scottish MPs to continue.
So William Hague's got it wrong.
William is ignoring the fact that there are issues that will remain reserved to the UK Parliament, where Scottish MPs will still have an important decision-making capability to determine issues on behalf of people in Scotland.
And they will still have that decision-making. They must have that unless you manage to make Scotland independent. But you will be setting the rate of income tax for Scotland. And what I am going to propose tomorrow, and David Cameron proposed in our English manifesto, is that when we therefore set the rate of income tax for the rest of the UK, the rate of income tax for England, it must have the agreement of the majority of the English members of Parliament. Now, isn't that an absolutely reasonable position?
Harriet Harman, do you like the sound of this?
I do think that we need change, but I don't think the way to do it is on a back of an envelope in order to try and win votes at the election or horse trading between different political parties. Obviously, with the devolution to Scotland, also devolution to Wales and London as well, and because we want further decision-making in regions, you know, not just the city regions but county regions as well, we have to sit down and work out on a cross-party basis what is the best way of changing things. And I think pulling something out of a hat on the back of an envelope is not the way to do.
Labour don't want to do anything.
No, we do. We want.
This is a head in the sand attitude.
We actually proposed.
The vote of England will swallow anything.
No, this is what we did in Scotland. Is that we actually had a big constitutional convention to discuss with all civil society and across all the different parties what needed to be done, and then we had a referendum, and that is the process. And if you're going to have big constitutional change, it needs to work, and it needs to last, and it needs to be fair. And that's why we're suggesting a proper, and it shouldn't be done just by politicians in Westminster and jumped on into a manifesto, an English manifesto.
This is a general election. Why can't people decide in the general election?
Because what you should do is put forward a process which engages with everybody and gets a decent and fair result.
Let's just pause a moment. Let's just pause a moment. Yes, you said the second round, then I want to get back to Abby, who asked the question.
If you're wasting time on this manifesto, why can't you tell us the 7 billion cuts to welfare? Why can't you spend some time on something which we want to know about instead of something which should be sorted out in the next Parliament?
We might come to that too. Abby Price, please. What's your view?
I'd be inclined to agree with William Hague's view, and I do think it would be dangerous for a party that's essentially predominantly a single issue to hold the balance of power. The coalition would be pursuing a particular agenda rather than one for the greater good.
Well, they're not going to have a coalition with us. So,
but will they have? All right, but can I?
We're having no tie-up with them at all.
The point that Abby makes is about whether or not the actions that we would take post-election would be in the interests of just Scotland or the whole of the United Kingdom. And the point I was making in my original answer was about the key priority of SNP MPs would be to take the steps to end austerity. right across the United Kingdom, and to take those steps in the interests of everybody across the United Kingdom. So, for example, we could secure the necessary investment in the National Health Service right across the whole of the UK that I know people in West Bromwich and people in the west of Edinburgh want to see secured, so that we can deliver that for the whole of the United Kingdom. So SNP MPs will contribute to the post-election environment in a responsible and constructive way, just in the same way as we have governed in Scotland for the last 8 years as a responsible and coherent government delivering on the priorities of the people of our country.
I'm going to pick up on the point that you made up at the back there with a question from Christopher Jones, please. Christopher Jones, where are you?
As voters, are we in the dark about the four main parties' spending plans, as the IFS says?
Yeah, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which we now know is the gold standard for testing what people claim in their manifestos, says that we're in the dark about the four main parties, and we don't know what they're saying. Harriet Harman, and the question, of course, up there was, you know, what are you... well, for you, I don't know what it would be. For the Tories, where the cuts are coming.
Well, we have set out in quite a lot of detail what we're going to do. So I hope that you won't feel you're in the dark. That we've said that our determination is that every year we should pay down the deficit, that by the end of Parliament, if not sooner, we will have ended the deficit in relation to day-to-day spending. We've also said we want to put extra money into the National Health Service, but that we won't do that by borrowing. Instead, we would do that by having a mansion tax on homes over £2 million and various other things that would contribute to the extra funds into the NHS.
Are the IFS right to say that your borrowing will be up 90 billion by 2020?
Well, no, because they're not
That's
taking into account... Well, that, you know, they're contrasting that with the Tories, and that is not the position. The position is, as I've stated it, that actually we will be paying down the deficit year by year. We've said that there are departments which are protected, which is education, which is health and international development. There will have to be cuts in the budgets of other departments, and we've started work on that with what's called zero-based reviews, and we've published papers showing where we think money can be saved. But we've also showed how we can protect the NHS, how we can protect frontline policing, for example, with abolishing the police and crime commissioners, how we can actually have extra childcare by increasing the bank levy. So what we've tried to do, because people do want to know what we would actually do, is we've said what we'll do, but we've also said how we will fund it. And we've also said we'll pay down the deficit, but not in a way which is really unfair in the way that the Tories have done it. And we will put up tax for those people earning on more than £150,000. So that will contribute to cutting the deficit. And we will not have extreme spending cuts like the Tories would do, which would hit the NHS and hit it hard.
But these are exactly the words he was complaining about at the back, because they're words, aren't they? We don't really know. I mean, the IFS said we wouldn't know what we're voting for if we were going to vote Labour, according to Paul Johnson. He says because there's so much vagueness about it. You're so vague about what you're actually going to borrow or want to borrow.
No, I don't think...
Is it impossible to be more specific? Or,
or do you
refute what they say?
I'm being very specific. And we have been, in our manifesto, very specific. For everything we've said what we're going to do, we've actually said how we would finance it. We've also said that whilst we will put up tax for up to 50% for those who are on over £150,000, that actually we will not put up the other income tax rates, and we will not put up VAT, and we will keep that promise. We know that people feel the promises have been broken by the last government, and they know that there's been problems in the health service. They want to know that the health service can be supported, but they want to be clear about what's going to happen on taxes. So we are not leaving people in the dark. You know, do have a look at what we're saying. It is very specific and it's very detailed. And, you know, if we get into government, we will put this
I think I'll take a pause now, if you would. Thank you very much.
Well, then you're saying, well, I'm not giving you enough
No, you can't do the whole manifesto.
I'm here to, you know, to give the information.
When I say, are you giving enough, you don't have to give all the details such as you've got. You just refute or not. But, William Hague, the accusation against you from the IFS, and they're very interesting, the IFS, on this, what they say about you is there's no detail about the bad stuff, which was what the man up at the back said. Why is there no detail about the bad stuff? Cuts of 9 to 10 billion of welfare cuts, 13 billion of departmental cuts. Is it because you don't know? I mean, Osborne keeps saying, trust us, we know how to handle money. But you never actually tell us. You can't tell that man up there. Perhaps you can.
Well, in the case of the government, there is an enormous amount of detail because we're actually entering the fiscal year 2015 to 16. The government has a budget. It's all there. And in that year, we are raising income tax thresholds to take more people out of tax altogether. We are saving money in some government departments. And this is the policy of the Conservative Party. It's there in enormous detail for the current financial year, and we want to continue that approach. The other,
no, it isn't. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. You haven't. There's a leaked document, and everyone refutes it, saying what you're going to do in terms of cutting things. You say some departments. But what are you going to do about the welfare bill?
Let me give you some examples.
Well, give me some welfare.
I will give you some welfare examples. We've already introduced a cap of £26,000 on welfare benefits for a household.
How much does that say?
So that it... No, but let me... we'll have to have enough time to explain what we're going to do. I haven't actually finished the sentence yet. I'm about to say...
How many people hit that ceiling at the moment?
I'm about to say, David, that we will reduce that to £23,000. That is one of the ways in which we've created incentives to work. We are going to freeze benefits, some benefits, over the next 2 years. We've already announced that. That saves £2 billion. But of course, we will always protect pensioners, who we've introduced a triple lock for, and we will protect the most vulnerable people. So there is detail.
That's vulnerable millionaires.
It's not... It is that... Labour say they will tax millionaires, and you know every Labour government has ended up taxing people who are not remotely millionaires and taxing everybody in the country a great deal more and having a lot more people out of work at the same time. That's been the record of every Labour government in history. So there is detail to what we will do. But the other figures that came out today, as well as the IFS report, showed that we've now more than halved the deficit. And I think the gentleman back there in the glasses made an important point, because he said there's been pain, and there has been pain in the last few years. Don't go back on it now. Because the real austerity we've seen in some countries is when they lose control of their deficit. Portugal has had to cut its health service by 17%. Greece has had to cut its health service by 14%. We haven't had to do anything like that in this country because we're getting a grip on our deficit. And that's what's bringing business confidence. That's why we've got 2 million more people in work in this country than we had 5 years ago. And no Labour minister has ever been able to come on this programme and say that, ever in history. That is an important achievement of the Conservatives over the last 5 years.
Paul Nuttall.
Well, I think this report is striking. It shows that, I think it says the Conservatives got £25 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments, including £8 billion on the NHS. Now, I've no idea where they're getting this money from. I'm sure you haven't, unless they found some sort of magic money tree in Conservative central office. You know, they're spending money like confetti, or they're making promises because, unfortunately, for them, their Conservative campaign has faltered, it's flatlined, and they've got no detail on eliminating the deficit. Now, William might say that they've halved the deficit, but national debt has doubled, so in effect...
What about you?
What
about UKIP?
Well, do you know what, David? We are the only political party in this election, and indeed in British political history, that has had its manifesto signed off by an independent economic think tank.
But haven't you got extraordinary figures in there, like what you think you'll save if we leave the EU? Something which you can't know we will do, even if you win your 2 or 3
We've
seats.
made it perfectly clear how we will make £32 billion worth of savings. We can do this by slashing the foreign aid budget, which is absolutely crazy, considering we don't know where half of that money actually goes, that we're still giving money to 8 out of the 10 most corrupt countries on the planet. We want to scrap the vanity project, which is HS2. We want to rip up the Barner formula. And indeed, of course, there will be a dividend when we leave the European Union, which is why UKIP was indeed founded. But I just want to make one last point on this. The reality about these manifestos is this. The Conservative and Labour Party manifesto that you see now, you may as well just get it and rip it up. It's not worth the paper it's written on, because what comes after May the 7th will be some form of coalition, some form of backdoor deal. And as Lord O'Donnell said, who was the guy who put together the coalition back in 2010, this general election now, and the manifestos are merely the foreplay. The consummation will happen after May the 7th.
OK. Sounds like the advice UKIP took with its 2010 manifesto. Don't read it, and if you have read it, tear it up.
Well, I read the 12 pages.
You did? Oh, that was the introduction?
No.
Not 350 pages.
It was 12 pages, and then there was about 450 pages of backup documents.
Oh, too much for anybody. Yes, the woman there on the right there.
Hello.
Hello.
You talk about halving the deficit, but what about the people who are forced to use food banks? What about the children who are below the poverty line? When are they going to feel that recovery, and how are they going to feel it if you're making further cuts to the welfare? Like
All right, Natalie Bennett.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction of reality to what we've just heard, a great deal of political sparring of the worst sort. I'm really astonished, William Hague, that you, as you're leaving politics, should be boasting about the benefit cap. A judge said that that benefit cap put us in breach of the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. We are punishing children. We are putting children, as the audience member says, in poverty. Now, I was at a hustings this morning in my local constituency, Holborn and St Pancras, with some carers. Family carers, many of them with children and other relatives with disabilities. And the mood was of absolute despair. And that's of the impact of the welfare cuts we've already seen. The loss of the independent living allowance, the 20% cut to disability payments, as though somehow or other disability had suddenly 20% of it had just disappeared, that this government inflicted. What we were talking about austerity. What austerity has meant the poor and the disadvantaged and the young paying for the greed and the fraud of the bankers. It's an utterly failed policy.
You don't agree we're in the dark in the way the IFS said about what the parties would do? You obviously think you know which way they'll go.
Well, what we know what we're being offered is austerity heavy or austerity light. And I know when I'm really disappointed that the IFS didn't look at the Green Party manifesto, because we set out very clearly, and Adam Bienkov, an independent commentator, said we were the clearest of all. We are saying that we need to restore public funding, public services, create 1 million new jobs in the public service, restore the NHS, free social care, basically turn this society round so big multinational companies and rich individuals pay their way as they're not at the moment. And that's the answer to the state of our society and the state of our debt and our deficit.
Can I just... you made the point about the IFS. I'll just tell you what the IFS did say about the Greens. Their plans to raise $200 billion from tax avoidance and wealth taxes, I quote Paul Johnson, would be laughable if it weren't playing into a wider narrative that there's a magic money tree that we can pluck at will.
Well, I think what you're looking at is a very conventional economics.
I'm sorry, I'm not looking at anything. I'm quoting what the IFS said.
And I'm talking about
you were saying they'd said nothing. They did say this.
Well, what I'm talking about is the IFS being a very conventional economics that basically somehow assumes that we can continue to allow the wealthy to keep getting wealthier while the rest of us get poorer. And that very clearly can't continue.
OK.
I just want to make a point on... because the only jobs that Natalie Bennett has just been calling for are public sector jobs. Here in the West Midlands, there are 116,000 more people in work than there were 5 years ago. People coming home with a pay packet, able to provide for their families. And this isn't... I'm not hearing this from the other parties on this pan. And this is the answer to poverty. It is the answer to the future of our country. And if we pursue the sorts of policies that Natalie has been talking about, there won't be jobs being created by businesses across the country. There's nothing there to support businesses. It's businesses that produce the wealth and jobs that then make this country a successful place.
Well,
John Spinning.
The point the lady made a second ago about food banks is one of the reasons why we've put central in our manifesto the ending of austerity, because there's 117,000 people in Scotland using food banks in the 21st century. It's absolutely atrocious. So and the policy of austerity on any objective measure has failed. There should be, today they're announcing on the television as I came in that borrowing is £87 billion this year. Under the Chancellor's plans, it should be zero. The deficit should have been eliminated. So, so austerity on any measure has failed, and it's also causing great hardship to people in our communities. Now, we've put at the centre of our proposition, a 0.5% increase in real terms in public expenditure. That would be right across the United Kingdom. Yes, there would be consequences and benefits in public spending in Scotland, but it would start the process of investing in our infrastructure, ensuring that we had the capability to create the foundations of economic infrastructure that would be good and strong for our future economic prospects and success. And it would create the jobs and the employment opportunities that would get people back into economic activity.
The IFS said that SNP plans would mean a cut of 4.3% outside the NHS, didn't they? Why did they say that? Well, they got that wrong.
Well, what the IFS didn't do was they didn't give us any financial credit for the commitment that we'd given to increase certain taxes, as they gave to the Labour Party in the analysis, and I don't understand why that's the case. Secondly, they complimented us for not assuming significant sums in revenue from tax avoidance. Although we're committed to tackling tax avoidance, we didn't put it into our financial plans. But they gave that credit to the Labour Party and the Conservatives. So that explains some of why the IFS analysis, I think, is a bit...
We've gone on a long time on this, but I do just want to hear one or two members of the audience, then we'll take another question. We're almost at the end of our time. The woman up there, the second row from the back.
Hi. I'd like to make 2 points, really. First point, Ed Miliband recently said he was going to invest in the NHS by training more nurses. I'd like to know, why isn't he considering offering jobs, permanent contracts, to the hundreds of nurses who've already done their training and can't get posts? And second thing...
You're not a nurse yourself, by any chance?
I am.
You are a nurse, yes. OK. And the second point?
And the second point I'd like to make is that we are responsible. I know it's very sad that people have to go to food banks. I think it's very sad that people have to claim benefits. But we, each and every one of us in this country, have to take responsibility. And in that responsibility, decide on lifestyle choices, whether we have children, whether we go out and look for employment. And it isn't everybody's responsibility to do that for the people that perhaps some of them don't.
Who's speaking out?
Sure, being in poverty isn't a lifestyle choice. If you don't have the options, the chances like other people, you say the employment's decreased, but sure, 0-hour contracts have increased, and that's as good as being on benefits and such. But it's just a technical loophole to say that people are still employed.
A lot of the people who go...
Apprenticeship as well.
A lot of the people who go to food banks are people who are employed, but they are on 0-hour contracts and they don't make enough money for that week, or they're just so low paid. And so it's not, you know, David Cameron said that, you know, people were just, it was well advertised, so people going to food banks. But I think William Hague shouldn't be boasting too much about jobs, because there is an epidemic of insecurity.
And a lot of those jobs that have been created, we've seen a situation where public services have been privatised, and what were reasonably stable, secure jobs with moderately decent pay have become 0-hour contracts, minimum wage, casualised jobs. And that's where a lot of the jobs have come from.
Thank you, William. Let me just go to the man there. Second row from the top. Yes, you.
You're moving the conversation away from what was originally asked of where will the money come from in all your policies? Because it's all well and saying we should create jobs or we should do this and that. You're not giving us the informed... the information on how we can choose who is the best to lead the country, that will give us the chance to have jobs, that will get people to stop using food banks.
What is the information you want?
Where these cuts are going to come from? Because they've all come out with, we're going to spend this much on the NHS, we're going to spend this much on all these different things that sound good, but they're not going to say where the money is going to come from, which is usually going to be cuts or tax. And we need to know where those are going to come from as well.
We're the only political party that have had this signed off by an independent economic think tank. Yeah. I hope other parties in future elections do exactly the same.
And we've set out where the tax is coming from and saying that no one earning less than £42,000 a year will face any more tax on earnings.
But this is often said, what you've just said, about it not being clear. I mean, the two larger parties, sitting one on my right, one on my left, are you not happy with what they've said tonight about what their plans are? Where is it that they're failing you?
Well, there's 30 billion black hole in Conservatives. I don't know the number on Labour. But they've just repeated exactly the same policies that we already know about. But the IFS, if the IFS don't have the numbers to fill in the blanks, then I think a lot of the public won't either.
And this was one of the IFS complaints. You wouldn't know what you're voting for. Harriet Hum, do you want to have one more go at convincing him? And I'll give you one more go at convincing him. Yes, as long as you keep it brief, because we're coming to the end.
OK, so So I do think, for example, on childcare, we've said that we're going to increase it to 25 hours a week free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds. We've said that that will cost £800 million, and we've said we'll do that by increasing the bank levy. So what we've done is very specifically, for all our different proposals, we've actually said where the money will come from. And, you know, we have tried to be clear. I know that the more everybody says it isn't clear, the more people think it isn't. And there is a trust deficit, which means lots of people don't believe promises that are made, and lots of promises have been broken. And so I do think that it's really important that we have been absolutely clear, and we've set it out in our manifesto.
All right.
And it's not all the wonderful things we'd like to do, but it's a very important start, and at least it's turning away from the extreme cuts and the austerity, which have made this country worse off and also failed to cut the deficit.
Are you clearer with that or not?
Well, I haven't got the figures to look at
here. Have you read their manifesto?
How come the IFS...
Maybe distribute manifestos after this and you can have a look and see what they say.
How come the IFS haven't been aware of this and haven't been able to fill in that, you know, your manifesto is absolutely covered?
It is a major flaw in the defence that politicians make, that everything is costed, when the IFS says, well, we can't make head or tail of it, which is in fact what they say. William Hague.
Let me have a go with the gentleman up there as well.
Then it's Paul Johnson for president.
And to save the money we need to save, to eliminate the budget deficit, we have to save for 2 more years £1 out of every £100 that the government spends. That is the scale of cuts or reductions. And businesses have to do that all the time. Many households have to do that all the time. Save £1 out of 100. It's entirely possible to do that. We've been doing more than that in the last 5 years. But I really have to react to this belittling of the growth of employment in this country that we've just heard from some on the panel. We have created 1,000 new jobs on average every working day in this Parliament. It's our prime objective to continue doing that.
Yeah.
The number of 0-hour contracts, this is a very important point, is 1 in 50 of the jobs in this country.
And 20% of workers are on less than a living wage. They're not paying enough money to live on.
All right. As I said, the only jobs, Natalie Benyon, are public sector jobs with nobody to pay for. And we have to be able to pay for them.
You've had your go.
3/4 of the jobs are full-time.
You've had your go. I can take a couple more people, but you have to come to an end. The man up there, the hand up there, I don't know whose it is. Yours, yes, sir. Be quick if you would.
I'm glad that Natalie's brought up the question of reality. Can we just think back what Labour did in their 13 years and how they left the country in the state that it was, and we're having to have that sorted out now.
All right. And the man at the very back there, in the middle at the back, you, sir.
You know, in our Sikh Gurdwaras, we have free kitchen. And a lot of people from different communities are actually using that now. So it is William, it's a real problem. You know, like they come in, they're crying with the kiddies. So please look at that. I'm just asking. I know we're doing well with everything.
OK, and you, sir, in the second row here.
Mr Hague, you say you're protecting the vulnerable, and it's good that the more and more people are in work, but that is not filtering down while we've got food banks. If you've costed your policies, can you tell us how much it would cost to just eliminate it? Why can't you make an election pledge that in the next 5 years, if elected, you would eliminate food banks from our streets?
And you've got 5 seconds to answer that, John. I'm sorry.
We will be able to eliminate, if we pursue our policies, we'll be able to eliminate youth unemployment altogether.
Food banks,
to have full employment in this country. Yes, but it is the way to do that is to have people in work and able to provide themselves in successful jobs.
But you've got to tackle the value of employment, William, and that's the issue, because most of the people are using food banks are people who are in employment and suffering because of in-work poverty. And we've got to increase the value of employment that comes about by investment in our economy. That's why we need to end
the first thing you can do is by taking everyone on minimum wage out of taxation altogether.
No, better still, you can make the minimum wage a living wage.
Hustings comes to an end. Time's up. Next week, now I said this in the beginning of the programme, it seems quite a long time ago. Next week we're going to be in Leeds, and we'll have David Cameron, Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg, live in front of a Question Time audience at 8 o'clock, a half an hour each, separately. And the week after that, we're going to be in London for a special Friday edition of Question Time, looking at the results of the election and hearing from our Question Time audience what they think of it. So if you want to come either to Leeds or to London, apply by going to our website, call 0330 123 9988 alternatively. And if you're listening as ever on 5 Live now, the debate goes on Question Time Extra Time. But here, my thanks to all our panellists and to all of you who came to West Bromwich. Until next Thursday, from Question Time, good night.
More late-night political talk with Andrew Neil next on BBC One, this week on the election campaign. And the Daily Politics continues Monday with the Home Affairs debate at 2 o'clock on BBC Two. Then later on Monday evening, Evan Davis will be getting to the heart of it in the Leader interviews with leader of the SNP